Let's speak with Simon Williams, Head of Policy at the RAC. Extraordinary numbers. Is this down, do you sense, Simon, to people being a bit skint, or people not knowing the laws, or, like our aforementioned texter, people just ignoring things? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Part of it, I think, is down to confusion. Some of the stuff I was reading earlier was about Bristol's clean air zone. I'm not far from Bristol here. And the signage, a traffic tribunal said, wasn't that clear. The signage, no doubt, will meet the regulations, but could it be clearer? It probably could. Some people are actually driving into these zones and not even knowing it. One chap, just drove through it very briefly, didn't realise, and now is being chased by bailiffs.
Yeah.
There's no question that clean air zones are needed, and people that absolutely flout the law should be pursued. But it also has to be proportionate, and we do a lot in the private parking space, and had a lot of issues over the years since the private parking code of practice came into force.
Yeah.
And the code's still not in force 5 years after the Act was passed, and people are still being chased by debt recovery companies for things which are relatively minor misdemeanours.
Who would have thought the humble motor car, Simon? I mean, when Henry Ford was dropping those things off the production line and stating that I want my workers to be able to afford the very thing that they own, or that might be an apocryphal urban myth, but that's often said. At that time, amazing engineering, social mobility, and yet it's such an area now, isn't it, of controversy. Driving a car is something you almost have to do at night because you're embarrassed to do it because of various political pressures. And even when you do, if you get something horribly wrong, someone's coming for you, and the fines are not cheap. I mean, it's quite tricky. It's no longer a respectful thing, it seems, being a motorist.
8 in 10 of us, according to long-term research from the RAC report on motoring, you can see behind me, says they struggle to get by without having access to a car. So yeah. We know the car is vital. We know public transport in this country is not good enough unless you're in London and possibly Manchester. Elsewhere, you're going to struggle. You need a car. And unfortunately, you are being hit with fines at all levels. Part of the reason we're seeing more of these bailiff situations is because councils in England had their powers increased by the previous government in 2022. So they made it possible to enforce yellow box junctions and moving traffic offences, things like turning left and right turns, no entries, and bus lanes they'd had for some time already. We have an issue at the RAC with bus lanes in terms of the signage. Certainly with the ones that operate at only at certain times of the day. I think it's very hard for motorists to understand when there's so much going on at the wheel and you have to read a sign, work out what time it is, whether you're in, whether you can drive in that lane or not. And a lot of people just err on the side of caution and don't drive in that lane. That causes more congestion. And I think a lot of drivers will be annoyed by the number of short bus lanes they see. Yeah. But it's wrong to drive in a bus lane, and you shouldn't. But the fine ought to be proportionate, and then all of a sudden being chased by bailiffs seems pretty harsh. But councils are up against it. They've got books to balance, and a shortfall of budget. But it seems like they're going after the motorists, and obviously in many cases they're already being taxed because they're already council taxpayers in their area. Indeed.
Good point. Simon, thank you for your time as ever, Head of Policy at the RAC. Let's speak separately on this point with Russell Hamblin-Boone, CEO at the Civil Enforcement Association. Russell, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I'd imagine business is booming in your area with your members and the like.
Well, what we do is at no cost to the public purse, and what we do is support councils in being able to recover outstanding debts and fines, in some cases going back over several years. And what we've seen here with this significant increase is the councils catching up with the backlog that they had going back to the pandemic, with the court delays and everything else, allied to, as Simon was saying, more use of clean air zones and low traffic neighbourhoods and things like that being enforced by the councils. And I think that's probably a positive thing, because what we're doing is tackling deviant and antisocial behaviour to make our towns and cities safer.
Do you ever, I think one of the things that, look, I think this is the kind of Gordian knot moment. I've never known the answer to this, but there's a bit of you that thinks, hang on, I drove on the wrong coloured paint. and I got £100 fine. You know, if I'd smashed the windows of my local supermarket, I might not get £100 fine. It seems, and then of course once it gets to you guys, then it becomes even more. So that might be 200 quid. If you contest it, that might be 400 quid. It's the sheer levels of money involved that I think perhaps angers many people. You must understand that as well as being the CEO of the Civil Enforcement Association. I'm sure you're a driver. I'm sure you're a nice bloke as well, Russell. I mean, it's the heady numbers involved that I think people have a problem with as well.
Yeah, but we also have to look at other heady numbers. Of that 4 million, a number of those will be multiple cases. So individuals who've got a whole load of those parking fines that they're ignoring. On top of that, we estimate 10 million vehicles out there that are going around without tax, MOT, insurance, that they're registered falsely with the DVLA. False names and addresses, which makes our job more difficult, of course. But what we're doing is making sure that we're getting those vehicles off the road, that we're making sure that people are complying with the rules. As a motorist, I also get frustrated when I pull up at a junction and I can't see down the road because someone's parked on the corner of the road, or when you're pushing a pushchair at the drop curb, you can't get past because someone's decided that's where they're going to park.
Yep.
So it's important that we, those laws are there in place for a purpose, and it's important that the council, which doesn't really have very many other powers, uses the power of the courts to authorise enforcement agents to enforce those fines and ensure that the council's getting the funds that it's needed, which is after all going to be used to repair the potholes that we all complain about as motorists as well.
So they kind of know, don't they? It's baked into existence that there's going to be some people that there's probably a percentage number on a book somewhere that says X amount of people will fluff up the regulations, and therefore we know we can rely, or they can almost rely on a certain income, right? Because they know a percentage of people won't play by the rule book.
Well, I suppose that goes for any sort of town or city or any neighbourhood. There's a percentage of people who choose to act more selfishly. Most of us will, there are 18 million penalty charge notices issued. 4 million of them went to enforcement, and as I said, a significant proportion of those will be for the same individuals. So actually, most of us are paying our penalty charge notices, and most of us pay it within 28 days, which means we only pay half the charge in the first place. You've got to ignore 6 letters over a 5-month period before your case gets taken to court. And then following that process, that's when the enforcement agents get authorised, and you might get a knock on the door if you choose to ignore all of their communication before they visit you as well. So you've got to be pretty determined not to pay your fine to actually get that knock on the door and the associated costs. But some people...
Somebody earlier, I don't know if you heard it, and I can't now find the text, but they'd said that they had ignored lots of these tickets, and once it goes past a year, it's essentially dropped because you guys haven't got the time or the effort or the personnel to follow everything up, and it just disappears. Is that true or false?
Well, it depends. It depends on the council. You can get a warrant resealed. You can go through the process again, but invariably, if you're one of those people who've chosen not to do it, you've probably got a number of other things that you haven't paid as well. And we've got great tracing. Our enforcement agents are very professional. They're very skilled, and the chances are they will catch up with you, and you'll have a very big bill to pay.
What's the most common thing you've found yourself dealing with in recent times, Russell? Is it just your humble parking ticket, or is it clean air zones? What's the picture looking like out there?
Yeah, like I said, there has been an increase in places like Birmingham where they're using clean air zones, and people are adjusting to it. And invariably, when you sort of meet people on the doorstep, they'll have a little moan about it, but they'll concede that I'm getting used to it. It's a fair cop. I'm annoyed by it. They air their grievances and then they pay. But we are seeing an increase in this sort of antisocial behaviour that people feel that they can act with impunity, and that perhaps the fines aren't big enough. I mean, average £70 fine. I was reading something on a social media site where a businessman was saying it just makes good business sense for me to park where I want in London, because I can park for £15 and move the car every 2 hours, or I can leave it there all day and it only costs me £70. So I'd rather just leave the car there all day, inconvenient everybody else, emergency service vehicles or whatever, because it's cheaper.
There it is, Russell, on that point. Thank you. Russell Hamblin-Boone, CEO of the Civil Enforcement Association. Look, if